My guest today is Jenna Wertheimer, who leads Grace Preparatory Academy, a university model hybrid homeschool just outside of Boston in Needham, Massachusetts. Students in kindergarten through eighth grade attend drop off classes with hired teachers 2 days a week from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., and then continue to work on their curriculum at home with their parents or in family organized cooperatives. Grace Prep was launched in 2012 by two homeschooling moms who wanted more consistent structure and social interactions for their children within a faith-based learning environment. Their initial class had about 7 students. Today, Grace Prep serves 71 students with 11 staff members and costs just over $4,000 a year, with scholarships available for families to further defray fees. Jenna Wertheimer, welcome to the Liberated Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here, and I was so happy to see Grace Prep up close in a recent visit and to see what you've built there. It's just amazing that this program continues to grow. You've nearly tripled your enrollment in just the past 3 years. So there's clearly a demand for hybrid homeschool programs all across the country, including where you and I live here in Massachusetts. And so I want to get into all of that, but I'd love to start with your sort of personal journey, starting off as a homeschooling mom several years ago, before Grace Prep existed, and then maybe you could share a little bit about, why you chose to homeschool and some of those experiences early on with homeschooling.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. I really do count it a privilege to be a part of Grace Prep, and I'm so glad that we have this opportunity. So we started homeschooling. My husband and I were both in education and decided that we wanted to homeschool to give our kids an opportunity to have more time at home, more time with us. And so that was a really key point in us homeschooling. We also had 3 boys that were pretty active and felt like we needed to give them more opportunity to run around, and maybe a public setting in a classroom wasn't necessarily the best option for them. So that's where we started. And so we homeschooled for a bit. We homeschooled my oldest until he was going into 8th grade. And by then, I was pretty burnt out from homeschooling. We had 5 kids. It was a lot of work. And plus, we were still having children. So there's just, the physical and emotional tax that goes along with that. And so we were homeschooling. It was great. We were part of a cooperative, which was wonderful, except it only met 1 day a week and for a couple of hours. So by the time, we had our 4th child, I was, kind of done. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, probably most Octobers, crying, thinking, I can't do this anymore. It's too hard. So anyhow, but we kept, persevering. We kept doing it. And then all our kids at that point, our older kids, were wanting to test the waters in a what they called real school, and so we decided that we would try that out, give me a break, and so we had some of our kids go into a couple of different school situations. We did private and public. And that was great for a while, until it wasn't. And so when my daughter was in about 4th grade, we we're just noticing some things that we just weren't happy with. And so we decided to pull her out. And I had known a couple of parents who were homeschooling and they were doing this new thing. And so I had been talking to them and they were telling me about it. And I thought, all right, we might need to try this year. And so I had met with Laura Richmond and Nikki Smith, who had founded the school. And we just decided to jump in, and my daughter started 4th grade there, and it was a wonderful year. It was great.
Ah, that's such a great story. And Jenna, I really appreciate your honesty about homeschool mom burnout. I think that's a very real phenomenon for a lot of homeschooling families and something that should probably be talked about more because it is a heavy lift. And so I again appreciate your honesty there. And I wonder, thinking back, if Grace Prep had existed when your children were younger, would you have felt the need to put them into a public or private school? Or do you think that this would have been just the right blend of structure and support for you to avoid that?
Yeah, I think it would have been the perfect mix for me. Personally, I loved having that connection with other moms that were doing the same thing, which is why we loved our co-op. But it was still a lot of work just doing the co-op. And so I felt like it was the best of both worlds. You had homeschooling and you had some real school experiences, which our kids, our other kids didn't get until much later. So yeah, it would have been great. And I think it's one of the main goals of the founders was to make homeschooling sustainable. And this was definitely one of those opportunities. So I would have loved to have had Grace Prep back then.
Yeah, but you found it just in time for some of your
Yes.
children
Yes.
and began as a mom enrolling your kids at Grace Prep. And again, the two moms who started it were still leading the program then. How did it evolve sort of over the years from you being a mom with a child enrolled there to now running Grace Prep?
Right. Yeah. So even the first year from the jump, I had gotten heavily involved, mainly because I just really appreciated the model. And with most small things, you really need a lot of hands on deck. And so we had a lot of combined classrooms at the time, and so we needed help with math. And so I started helping out teaching a math class. And then the following year, I think I joined the board that year as well. And then the following year, just got a little bit more involved, especially being on the board. And then as Laura Richmond was transitioning from, leading the school, she was looking for somebody else to take that lead. And so it was definitely something that was on my heart to do. And we had gone to a conference together in Texas through University Model Schools. And I really felt when I was at that conference that this is what I'm meant to do. And so that calling was really strong. And that was in 2014. So that was 10
Wow.
years ago. Yeah.
Oh, so great. And what tremendous growth and success you've observed then at Grace Prep since then. And with hybrid homeschooling and the university model program nationwide, there just continues to be a lot of momentum there. So let's talk a little bit about what we mean by hybrid homeschools and the university
Sure.
model. Hybrid homeschooling was something that really began to emerge in kind of the mid 1990s. I know that Eric Warren, a professor at Kennesaw State University who runs the National Hybrid Schools Project, has done a lot of research on the origins of the hybrid school movement and its evolution over the years. He wrote a book about hybrid homeschools and talks about kind of all the different models, but the university model might be the most popular. There's sort of dozens of university model branded hybrid homeschools across the country. And typically they would be homeschool programs where students attend a brick and mortar location 2 or 3 days a week. And then the rest of the time they're at home or in their communities working on curriculum separately. What else is it about kind of hybrid homeschooling and that structure that you think is sort of worth noting?
Well, I think for one, parents are obviously and heavily invested in their children's education. A lot of our families, this is what they want to do. They really want to be invested. And I think that's critical. I think that's critical whether you're in a private school, public school. I think, studies show that students who have families that are deeply involved just do better. And so that's wonderful. And I think also having opportunities where you're meeting with people and you're in community with people almost instantly, you have support and you have people that are doing the same thing that you're doing. They're right along with you. They know what it's like on your very first day at home and you can't find the pencils or the pencil sharpener and you don't know where your books went. And then the next day you're going in and you're thinking, oh yeah, we're all set to go. And then we've forgotten our books at home. And so you can, really just talk with other people and say like, oh, that happened to me too. And you can encourage one another in terms of what's working well for you, especially if you have kids that are struggling in an area, you've got somebody right alongside that maybe has been doing this for a few years, and they can say, hey, we've tried this, this, and this worked for us. And they might offer you, some advice or resources that are really helpful.
And what was it about joining sort of the university model brand that was appealing? Because you started off, or the two moms who started off, weren't affiliated right out of the gate with university model schooling. What was the attraction there?
They do things with excellence, and that is, it's wonderful to be a part of that. And I noticed it when I went to that first new school workshop. Everything was just done really well and with excellence, and it was good to feel like we could be a part of that and have the support that we needed as a school. And so we actually hemmed and hawed for a few years about, do we want to do the university model? We're just doing it on our own, because there's a membership fee involved, and do we need to do that? But they do things with excellence. We're now accredited through them. And so that made us go through a process and think through things that we probably wouldn't have thought of on our own. We probably would have eventually gotten there because of our experience. We would have said, oh, we need to have a policy for this and we need to figure this out. But having gone through that process with them was critical. And I think it was really helpful to our success in at least the last few years.
So one of the things that I think is really interesting about hybrid homeschooling and these hybrid homeschool programs is that some are recognized as private schools and some are recognized as sort of homeschool cooperatives or collaboratives. And often that's just based on how the individuals in that community want to self-identify. Sometimes it might be based on regulations. The same is true with university model programs, university model, hybrid homeschools, even here in Massachusetts, where you run Grace Prep as a homeschool program. So students are registered as homeschoolers and then attend a couple of days a week. But there's another university model hybrid homeschool program out in Western Massachusetts that you were telling me about that's a recognized private school. And it's also something that you've been considering potentially pursuing in your town. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about sort of the rationale about that. What are some of the appealing characteristics of being a recognized private school versus a homeschool collaborative?
Sure. So, in fact, actually, there's another university model school on Cape Cod, and they actually also just received their private school status at the start of this school year. So it's part of our strategic plan in terms of becoming a better school, having that driving force of excellence, being recognized by the state would be really helpful. It also, I think, provides other opportunities that we wouldn't necessarily have on our own, like funding, other supports. So that would be the goal. So I think technically right now we're considered a tutoring service. And we're hoping by the end of this school year that we would transition to a private school status. It just gives us also like more credentials, I think, with families that aren't so sure what we're doing.
I mean, in some ways, it's like a part-time private school, which is just wonderful that these programs are able to be recognized by the state as private schools, even though students are only attending 2 or 3 days a week, and then, of course, working on curriculum at home. Just that ability to recognize education as looking different than a 5-day-a-week kind of traditional model. So exciting to see that growth. And speaking of growth, you have seen so much growth over the past few years. I know when we talked, you said you had just over 20 students in 2020, and now you're basically tripling to more than 70 students now. A lot of, I think, folks thought that the disruption caused by school closures and the pandemic response might have led to sort of short-term decisions by families to opt out of a district school or their traditional school. And then that when things got back to normal, parents would go back to that traditional schooling model. Yet you are proving that that's absolutely not the case, that if anything, interest in schooling alternatives and kind of options beyond a conventional classroom are growing, are accelerating. There's more demand there. What do you think are some of the reasons for that acceleration?
Well, I think the pandemic helped people think about some more things and kind of refocus. I think a lot of families felt like, and this is what I hear from families that I interview and coming to the school, is that they refocus and they think like, you know, I actually might be able to homeschool my children. I've had a little bit of an experience and, we all laugh and say like, well, that wasn't quite homeschooling, but it was. I mean, you were educating your children at home, but with no support and very little guidance, depending on the school situation that you were in or the school district. But I think families really decided what was more important to them. Was it more important that they spent time with their families, or was it more important to kind of dole out that job to the school districts? And I'm finding that families really valued that time. I know in our own family, it was really great when everybody was at home. I mean, yes, there were times where, it was a lot of people under one roof and it was tight spaces, but I think having that opportunity to spend time with one another and really, you know, deepening those relationships was huge. And I know even you see it still, even though the pandemic is, technically over, you still see some of those things in place where people were, meeting on Zoom with their families regularly and reconnecting with families, realizing that, gosh, what's important? Is it more important that I reconcile this relationship with this family member, knowing that, things could change very quickly? And so I think that those values really played a part in, and then obviously people got to experience what it's like homeschooling. And I think a lot of them walked away with it thinking that was actually really great. People who would have said, oh, I'll never do that. I don't have the patience, or I don't have, the stamina to do something like that, or I work. People now are working from home still and have found other ways to fit that schedule, that work schedule in alongside education.
Yeah, and you have a lot of working parents that are sending their kids to Grace Prep. I know when we talked, you said you have academics from some of the Boston universities. You have sort of families of all different careers and vocations joining Grace Prep. How do they manage to kind of approach this hybrid homeschooling model when they're still working?
Yeah, it's tricky certainly for some families. I think I told you about we had a mom or a family, and mom was going to law school and working part-time. They had 4 children. Dad was working full-time. How they managed, we all think it's a miracle how they managed to figure that out. But they do. And I think when people find something that's really important and valuable to them, they'll make the changes necessary and also make it work. So we have some families that co-op together on Tuesdays or Thursdays. We also have families that might double up their work on Thursdays so that they have Fridays together with their family. Or we have families that, like this one particular family where mom was in law school, they, I think, did a lot of work over on the weekends. So the toughest day for most of our families is Tuesday because things have to get done for the next day. But then you've got Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday to maybe ease into it, or you've got some extra time. And all time counts, right? As homeschoolers, right? We don't just say, oh, everything that you get done between 8 and 3 is the only thing that counts. This becomes your lifestyle. And when you're away on a vacation, you can explore history, especially where we live. It's so rich here. So there's a lot that goes into that. And I think families really do make an effort to make it work.
Yeah, and Grace Prep is financially accessible to so many families due to its low cost. And we see this to be the case with hybrid homeschools and micro schools across the country. They tend to be a fraction of the cost of other traditional private schools. That's certainly the case in Greater Boston. You're probably one of the lowest tuitions that anybody could find for any kind of private education option. So that makes it more of a possibility. You also are able to piece together scholarships and do fundraising. You are a recipient of the Vela Education Fund microgrant that I know you've said you've used toward various resources, including scholarships for families. So just to try to bring that cost down even more, Could you tell us, Jenna, what sort of the program is like? So when families drop off their kids at Grace Prep 2 days a week, 8 to 3, what does that look like? What is the day like?
Yeah, so we on Mondays we gather together. So most of our classrooms have some kind of homeroom or morning meeting, and students get an opportunity to share about their weekends or share something that they're excited about. And then we transition on Mondays to chapel, and so we have kind of like an assembly all together. First thing where we sing a couple of songs, we hear a speaker, and any announcements or things like that happen. And then we transition into our classes. And so our students do all of the core classes. And then we also have specials. And I think that's great for parents that I know when we were homeschooling, you kind of think like, oh, do I really want to take out all the paint and the art stuff and the glitter to do something? Or is that too much of a mess right now? We'll just kind of skip it. So I feel like as a homeschooler, sometimes it's easy to skip things. And so being here, students get to participate in things that they wouldn't necessarily do, or parents are not as jazzed about as some of our teachers are. And so they get that real experience, especially with our extracurricular activities. And then the day flies by. Every time at 3:20 comes around, I just think, oh wow, we're at the end of the day. I think a lot of our students just really enjoy seeing one another as well. And so the fact that they only get to see each other twice a week in school, they adore seeing each other then. And then a lot of our families too get together at least monthly, doing some field trips and things like that and excursions together. And so that's,
Mm.
the gist of our program. And there's some things that we want to add in over the years, but I think giving them those opportunities to have social interaction, to have extra things that parents wouldn't necessarily do at home, or have access to either. And doing things with a group is always so much fun.
Yeah, and that community that you're creating for the students as well as for the families. I know you said you have 42 families this year, over 70 kids. So just really creating that cohesive environment for parents and their children is just so exciting. Tell us about your teachers. Who are your teachers? How are you finding them, recruiting them? What's appealing to them about the hybrid homeschool model?
We actually our best way of getting teachers is through word of mouth and through within our circles. We find that that's a great access point. But since over the last few years we've had to add classes and add teachers, we've been advertising on different websites and whatnot, on different church bulletin boards, and emails and things like that. So, but we find that we have quite a few teachers that are semi-retired. They're not ready to be finished teaching, but they don't necessarily want the demand of being in the classroom 5 days a week. So we have some former Boston Public teachers. We had a teacher for a while from Georgia that was moving up to be with her family. And so she didn't want to stop teaching, but she really wanted to, have some sort. So having that part-time opportunity. A lot of our teachers also have a part-time job in addition to this. So they might be working on Tuesdays, Thursdays, or Fridays, doing something else like tutoring. We have one teacher that is a youth pastor. And so having that is great. And it gives them an opportunity to focus on their families and focus on the things that they want to do, but also still work. And teachers, they love their kids, right? They love their students. And so I could imagine myself even thinking, if I ever, when I eventually get to the age of retirement, I don't know if I'll want to retire from working with kids.
Love that. So just that attraction to teachers who may have put in, a couple of decades in a conventional school environment and are retired from that, but don't want to give up teaching. This is a perfect fit.
Mhm.
So that's just great to hear. One of the things I was struck by when I visited your beautiful space, and you lease a community space in Needham, was that you said currently you don't have any students enrolled from the town in which you're
Right.
based, that many of them are coming from Boston proper or surrounding locations. You have a lot of people driving really long distances to come to Grace Prep. What is attracting them, do you think, to your program?
Well, there's not a lot of options for them for the university model in Massachusetts. There's 3 schools, although I know each of us are talking with other people who are thinking of starting another university model in the kind of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Rhode Island area. And I think families find that it's 2 days a week. So it's reasonable to, travel a little bit of a distance. Some of our families, parents actually work in this area. And so they're already commuting this way. And then, you find that parents will also carpool and work together to make it work. So you only have to do one leg of the drive. But most of our families are, within, probably half an hour, 45 minutes, depending on traffic. Boston traffic can always
Right.
be temperamental.
That's right. And so, Jenna, do you think that momentum will continue to grow? Do you think that there is still mounting demand for your program, or do you think it's plateauing?
Absolutely. I think it's growing. I love that we get to be a part of this kind of groundswell as it's growing. The university model started in Texas about 30 years ago, and these schools are huge. Now, I don't know if we'll ever be 300 students, maybe we will, but I think having this opportunity for families that are really looking for something different, looking for something that provides accountability, especially for homeschoolers, provides support. I mean, I just feel like we can't not have that. We need to have all these different alternatives because everybody's different. And I think our traditional system can sometimes be lacking in what we need for all of our kids. If we were all the same, first of all, it would be very boring. But we're all different. And so it's great that kids are learning differently and they can have a school like this. And there's other schools that obviously have their own bend that are really great for serving, a certain population.
Yeah, I think that's what's so exciting to see is just the diversity of educational models and philosophies and structures in this kind of unconventional education space, including in Eastern Massachusetts, but all across the country. And so when you talk to families who might be interested in coming to Grace Prep, what are some of the constraints that still exist, right? Like you might have a family that says, gosh, this conventional school is not working for my kids, or it's working fine, but I want better than fine. But yet they're not quite ready to take the leap into some kind of unconventional model. What do you think are some of their major constraints?
Well, for some, I think it can be a financial decision because parents might feel like, well, I can't work and do this at the same time. So there might be that pull. Or you have families where you only have you have a single parent that is managing this, or we've had grandparents who have custody of children and are doing this. So that's restrictive at times. And so that can be difficult. I think also for some families, I think we get to move beyond this, but families might not feel confident about what they're doing. And so they might be hesitant to start something if they're not sure how they're going to actually be able to teach the material. And so I think that can make families a little bit nervous. But we do a lot of training, a lot of support. We have different families that I might recommend, hey, could you connect with this other family to give them a little bit of like a mentorship so that they can feel like they're on board. And then, we're really just open to our families and just say, hey, contact us if you need help, contact other families. We really try to establish those relationships among the families. But yeah, there's, I think, a lot of different factors. I think some too is parents worry about what other family members might think and what they're doing. And they question it and whether this is going to be enough or sufficient. I feel like that argument has kind of gone by the wayside a little bit more. And the socialization argument that used to always be homeschool. Oh, well, how do you socialize your children? People don't see that as much anymore because they see homeschoolers out in the communities. They see them doing more things.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say to you too, as someone who was homeschooling, even before Grace Prep existed, and kind of you've seen these trends over time. You've probably seen the greater acceptance of homeschooling. How else do you see homeschooling shifting, or has it shifted since you began in those early days?
Even just curriculum, back in the early days, we used to go to a convention each year and look for curriculum, but you had to buy it while you were there, or you had to pay a lot in shipping and things like that. But the amount of curriculum that is available now is incredible. So families can really find stuff that works for them. And we, offer the opportunity for families to add things in that we're not doing. So if they want to take a foreign language that we're not covering, they certainly have that opportunity. And there's so much more accessible out there. We're almost on the other end of the extreme. There's almost too much. Sometimes it's almost too hard to decide what people are doing or decide to do for a curriculum. But I think that's, huge right now, is just you've got so much more access, and you've got companies that are also providing more, like the museums and art galleries and other opportunities, dance studios. You've got gyms that are offering things for homeschoolers, ice skating rinks in the winter who, are offering things for you as a homeschooler to, take part in.
Yeah, so many more resources for homeschoolers, and like you said, so many more curriculum offerings, including many of which that are free. I think about Khan
Yeah.
Academy, of course, the online learning resource that's completely free, Duolingo for foreign language learning that's free. So just so many more options, and like you said, accessibility to families. So Jenna, if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about Grace Prep, maybe come for a visit and see what incredible, joyful learning space you've built, how can they reach out to you?
So we have a website, graceprepboston.org, and on there we have our information meetings. We have information meetings throughout the year. Actually, we have a few in the fall, some in January, some in March, where people can come to get to know our school. We usually do them on Zoom, which makes them really accessible for families, especially if you have little kids and you want to get them to bed. We have you can meet a lot of other families that are also considering it, and then we also have staff that attend. And then usually from there we offer visits or tours to just kind of see what it's like. There's a difference when you actually see things in action and see the friendships forming and the relationships there. That's really key. So that's great. So they can find us there. We also are on social media. We're on Instagram and Facebook. So you can find us there. And I love that I think that's is that how you and I found each other?
So we connected sort of through the Vela Education
Yeah.
Fund, and just all of the innovative learning models that are emerging here in Massachusetts and elsewhere. So just, it was such a privilege to be able to see what you're creating.
Yeah, it's great. And I love that we have a presence on social media and can share with people what's happening on the day to day, and then just overarching as well.
Well, Jenna Wertheimer, best wishes on your continued growth and success at Grace Prep. And thank you so much for being on the Liberated podcast.
Thank you.